Welcome to Frank's Diana Explains. Today's topic is the first lecture in my new course on cybersecurity at the University of Cambridge. I'm opening my class to the entire world by putting these recordings on YouTube, and you are most welcome to join us even if you're not one of my Cambridge students. If you are willing to engage with the course as intensely as my students who are going to be examining on this material in June, if you are willing to put in the work of studying the textbook and doing the exercises, you will have exactly the same opportunities as a Cambridge student to become competent at computer security. This course is for all computer scientists, not just for future security specialists. It consists of foundational material that should be an essential part of the training of every computer professional. Many spectacular security incidents were made possible by vulnerabilities introduced in the software by developers without this basic training. If all computer professionals learn to view the system they develop through the lens of adversarial thinking, they would have a better understanding of how malicious actors can subvert and exploit their systems. Developers who have this awareness would be more cautious when designing and implementing their systems, and the digital society would be a safer place. While redesigning the course, I surveyed available textbooks, and the one that best aligned with my vision and goals was this one, self-published by Professor Kevin Du. Indeed, very much hands-on, as the subtitle says, just like I wanted, and supported by a wealth of well-designed and pedagogically valid online resources, the so-called SEED Labs, SEED, Security Education. I recommend this book and the SEED Labs very highly. Besides the hands-on experience that's provided by the book and the SEED Labs, I also want to give you some awareness of the bigger picture of security. I felt that this book did not give you enough of that, so I supplemented it with my own notes. But my handout is not a substitute for the official course textbook, and it does not attempt to duplicate what's already in the book. So get the textbook. It's a very good textbook, it's very detailed, and it's especially useful for people without prior security experience. The SEED Labs are great. Each lab, which in this context means exercise, lets you practice a specific attack. The lab gives you a pre-configured virtual machine that exposes vulnerable services for you to attack in a controlled fashion, as well as all the tools required to implement the attack. You will use VirtualBox to run these virtual machines, and this requires a computer with an x86 processor, which excludes the newer Macs with Apple Silicon, and also the Raspberry Pis. So either get yourself a cheap or free x86 box that someone is discarding, for example a 10-year-old one is still fine and that's what I use myself at home, or use an in-cloud virtual machine as explained on the SEED Labs website. Either way, ensure you can run the SEED Labs virtual machine by the time the course starts. Please don't leave this until later. When I do lecture live, then at the end of the lecture there's always the keenest students who come and ask me clarifications on things that I just said. Now, when I lecture on YouTube like now, you can come and ask me questions in the comments, and I will answer all the pertinent questions publicly so that future viewers may also benefit from my replies. Please leave feedback on the course in the comments and with your like button, that's also a feedback signal. And also, if you are one of my Cambridge students, leave feedback with the departmental feedback form. I've been lecturing at Cambridge for a couple of decades now, and the positive comments from the students who appreciate what I do are a very powerful motivator to keep on doing better. I may not be able to please everyone all of the time, but I do listen to all comments, and I have implemented a number of suggestions and improvement that were put forward by your predecessors on other courses. The course syllabus is on the official course webpage. The link is in the description, and the biggest chapters are on software security, including stuff like buffer overflow and SQL injection, and also web and internet security, including stuff like cross-site request forgery and cross-site scripting. This course has, by design, a very strong practical orientation, and my main objective is that people who graduate from this course are able to spot and exploit those vulnerabilities as opposed to just being able to talk and handwave about them. Okay. Now, with these preliminaries out of the way, let's get into it. We live today in the 21st century in the digital society, and everything we do is mediated by computers. So it makes sense that cybersecurity has grown to a very significant role. Anything we rely on, e-commerce, e-banking, the power grid, other critical infrastructure, the internet itself, your digital medical records, your private correspondence, all the stuff and more needs to be protected against malicious attackers. And the worldwide global demand for cybersecurity specialists largely outstrips the available supply of competent people.
Industry as a whole needs to be more involved because we need to address the skills gap which everybody's been recently talking about, by 2022 there's potentially 1.8 million shortfall in the industry. That's a lot of people.
So we need to attract people to this type of career. But as I said, this Cambridge security course is not aimed merely at people who will make security their career. Every developer, every computer person needs to write software with an awareness that as soon as their system is deployed, there will be malicious actors who will try to poke holes in it for nefarious purposes. So I believe that some basic security education should be part of the curriculum of every computer scientist, whatever their specialism. And this is what I'm doing here. This course will be quite challenging, but it will also be fascinating. Security, in essence, is about outsmarting intelligent adversaries. And these intelligent adversaries could strike anywhere. Any part of the system you design and build could become a target. Your devious adversaries will probe your system for weaknesses, and they will look for the part that they find easiest to attack. Maybe because it's the one that you've done the most mistakes in, maybe because it's the one that they know best about, and so on and so on. And in any case, that part that they will decide to attack might not be the part that you know or understand the best. So one reason why this course may be more challenging than others in the computer science tripos is because this course requires you to acquire some background knowledge in many seemingly unrelated topics. Computing is a very complex field, and no single human being, not even a Turing Award winner, is able to understand a computer completely, absolutely, from top to bottom. Nobody can understand everything about how a computer works at all the levels, from the protocol messages that are exchanged between the web browser and the web server, to the structure of the application program, the operating system calls, the inside of the device drivers, the machine code that's executed by the processor, the circuitry that makes up the physical hardware, the device physics of how the transistors work, and so on and so on. Nobody understands all these levels. I mean, there are people who specialize one level, there are people who understand a few adjacent levels. Nobody understands the whole thing. As computer scientists, we dominate this complexity by using abstraction. And we've been teaching that to you from your very first term of your first year, is abstraction to dominate complexity. When we focus on one layer of this technology stack, then we take a simplified view of everything that happens underneath it. And in general, that's a very good approach. However, in security, we can't always afford this luxury and convenience of simplifying the stuff below us. So here's an example from stuff we're going to do later on in the course in greater detail. Imagine there is a program that, in its infinite kindness, sends you a present of either 5 or 10 pounds, depending on the flip of a coin. Here's the electronic version of flipping the coin. You just draw a random number and you check if it's even or odd. And if it's odd, then the reward is 5 pounds. If it's even, the reward is 10 pounds. Okay, and here's where you get the reward. Congratulations, blah. I'll send you blah blah pounds to blah blah blah, where this first blah is your name and the second blah is your sort code and bank account, which you have supplied as an input to this program. You notice here that this program defines 3 variables. Name, which is a string of characters, which holds your name, and then reward, which is an integer, which holds the number of pounds that are going to be paid out to you. And then payee, which is another string of characters, which will hold your sort code and account number, which are the UK banking coordinates. And so if you run the program, it will ask you for some input, and the interaction might look something like this. So the program prints, what's your name, and you reply, Honest Joe, and it sticks that into the variable name. Then it asks your sort code and bank account, and then it puts your input into the payee variable, and then it outputs, congratulations, Honest Joe. I'll send 10, because 10 is what came out of the flip of the coin, 10 pounds to this bank account that you supplied. Okay, very nice. So you will notice that the program only lets you write to 2 variables, the name with this function call in here, and the payee with this other function call here. The program does not ask you how much you want to be paid. It decides that for itself in this other part of the code. So despite the fact that the program doesn't ask for your input on how much you should be paid, a devious attacker might find ways to increase the reward just by crafting suitable inputs for the name and the payee that it is being asked about over here and over here. Can you see how they might do that? If you think you can, then why don't you test your assumptions by stopping the video now, trying compiling this program and checking whether your hunch actually works, whether you can make the program output something other than 5 or 10 by doing whatever it is that you think you could be doing. Stop the video and come back when you have tried. You'll have to retype this program, I'm afraid. Okay. All right, you're back. I assume very few of you will have actually tried. I still urge you to try, but I won't insist. Anyway, we'll revisit this problem in greater detail in a future lecture, but what we'll say for now is that at the level of abstraction of the C source code, there are really no further assignments to the reward variable after this line over here. There's nothing writes to reward. And so there should be absolutely no way that the content of this variable gets modified after here. It should remain at whatever it got out of this if statement, which is either 5 or 10. So how can an attacker overwrite this reward variable after this line here if no assignment to reward exists in the program? Well, to even acknowledge that this is possible, we cannot look at the level of the C language. We must look below that abstraction layer that is provided by C and look at what happens at the level of the compiled program. So only at that point we can understand that, okay, actually it is possible for the attacker to write a long string into one variable and have it overspill into another adjacent variable, in some way that breaks the rules of the abstraction layer of the C language. And I'm saying, for example, another adjacent variable, but they look adjacent, these variables look adjacent in the source code here, and so you could imagine, okay, well, I write something to the name and it spills over into here if the name is longer than these 20 characters that have been allocated. But there's nothing in the program that tells the compiler that it should first allocate this variable and then this variable and then this variable. The compiler is free to put them wherever it feels like. So this is all stuff that is beyond what the abstraction level of the C language says. Okay, so even just to understand what the attacker is doing, we must now become somewhat proficient not only in the C programming language that we were using to write the program, but also in lower level details about how the compiler allocates the data structures of our program into memory, how the high level language statements translate into machine language, and so on and so forth. And that is just to explain an attack that some adversary already came up with after they noticed that there was a vulnerability, after they noticed that, okay, I might spill over from one variable into another. Even greater ingenuity than that and greater background knowledge about other things is required for us to discover unknown vulnerabilities and anticipate possible new attacks. So this is why security is at the same time challenging and fascinating. You're pitting your wits against the wits of an intelligent opponent, and to beat that opponent, you must be at least, it's not just cleverness, you must be at least as knowledgeable as them in the areas where the opponent is going to strike. And you're not told in advance where those target areas are. So you must be willing to learn a lot at short notice about topics that might have nothing to do with your own specialty. You might have to learn about assembly language, how the operating system works, how TCP/IP works, firewalls, cryptography, digital electronics, even analog electronics for the matter, and so on and so forth. And if you have the happy mindset of an eternal learner, then great, it's going to be fun. Otherwise, it's going to be a chore and it's going to be very difficult. So to outsmart the attackers, you have to learn to think like them and you have to anticipate their moves. And this requires a lot of creativity and lateral thinking, and that's the fun part of security. So when I talk about the systems being attacked, with systems, I don't mean simply computer systems. Rather, I mean complex socio-technical systems, which include computers and organizations and people who work in those organizations. And some computer security attacks can be devastatingly effective even without really touching the technical part at all, if these attacks actually target a vulnerability in the social part of the socio-technical system. So, for example, one day I received a very worried phone call from someone that I hadn't heard from in a long while. It's a tradesman who had done work on my house a few years ago. Now, he remembered that I was in the business of computer security, and he needed some competent and trustworthy assistance about some serious problem that just happened to him. So he told me in a rather embarrassed voice that his wife was an invalid and no longer sexually active, and that was a problem for him, and for that reason he kind of confessed to me that he had been watching sexy videos on the internet. Okay, well, that's all right, but then all of a sudden he received a message from an unknown who said he had infected his computer with a Trojan, and he had recorded his porn watching and masturbation sessions through the webcam, and he would send the video of these exploits to everyone in the poor chap's address book unless he paid a ransom in Bitcoin. So basically extortion with some techno-porn twist. So this person was in a panic about this, and he asked me what to do, especially about how do I go about removing this all-seeing and all-controlling Trojan from my computer. What can I do about that? Because he rightly feared that he might get further blackmail requests even if he paid up. Now, when I heard this story, fortunately, I was able to reassure him that this was all a bluff on the part of the crook. The crook had not installed any Trojan, I told him. He had simply crafted a plausible threatening letter, and he had sent it to as many email addresses as he could find. And then the crook just sat back and simply pocketed the ransom from those few who actually believed that they had been caught masturbating and were sufficiently scared to believe the threats. Now, my tradesman friend was initially a bit skeptical about my reassurance that the Trojan didn't exist and was a bluff, but he was then convinced by my explanation once I started going through my own emails and then reading out to him one essentially identical letter that I had also received myself. So this said, "Greetings, I have to share bad news with you. Approximately a few months ago, I have gained access to your devices which you use for internet browsing, and after that I've started tracking your internet activities. And I have already installed a Trojan virus to operating systems of all the devices that you use to access your email. All right. And this software provides me with access to all the controls of your devices, blah, blah, blah. I've downloaded all your information, data, photos, blah, blah. I have access to all your messengers. My virus continuously refreshes the signature, and blah, 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 blah. And what else happens? I've discovered you're a big fan of adult websites. You really love this and that. And I managed to record a number of your dirty scenes and montaged a few videos and so on, which show the way you masturbate and reach orgasms. Yeah, if you have doubts, I can make a few clicks of the mouse and all your videos will be shared to your friends, colleagues, and relatives, and so on. And let's settle it this way. You transfer $1,600 to me in Bitcoin equivalent, and once the transfer is received, I will delete all this dirty stuff right away. Trust me, I keep my word." So there you go, a crafty low-tech attack that targeted a vulnerability not in the computer software, but in the user's psychology. There was no Trojan, like I told him, just a well-thought-out story that would sound believable and persuasive to some victims. Some recipients would know for sure that those events never happened and that the message had to be a fake. But others, oppressed by guilt and shame after believing that they had been caught out, might find the story all too plausible and might be scared into paying the ransom. Now, given the almost nil cost of sending out the emails to as many addresses as possible, the crook is obviously not worried if the response rate is very low, because it still makes an enormous return on his very modest investment. So the reason I told you this anecdote is I see at least two takeaways from it. Number one is that today's computers, and also today's smartphones for that matter, are sufficiently powerful, complex, and actually full of vulnerabilities that this scenario that was depicted in that email, even though it was fake, it is not too unrealistic. It is fairly believable that some very skilled and determined attacker might be able to deploy the kind of Trojan that was described in that email. But it would have to be a rather competent and resourceful attacker to do that. And nowadays, this type of high-tech payload tends to be used rather sparingly and only licensed at high prices to oppressive regimes for the purpose of spearfishing individual political opponents or dissidents or journalists and stuff like that. And there was a software called Pegasus that was in the news recently, developed by the NSO, a secretive Israeli organization. And this is one of these targeted Trojans that's used to facilitate human rights violations around the world on a massive scale. They just sell it to oppressive regimes who pay a lot of money for it, and then they can target whoever they like. The second takeaway, however, is that serious and exploitable vulnerabilities can be found not only in computers but also in human beings. And that therefore the competent security expert, to be competent, must also have a good grasp of human factors. Otherwise, they won't be able to protect complex socio-technical systems in a holistic fashion. And basically, every system that's of interest is a complex socio-technical system. Systems that are limited to just the machines are not that interesting. And when you look at the whole thing, they're always embedded in something bigger, which is socio-technical. So we'll have more to say about human factors in security in a future lecture. Now, to outsmart the attacker, wherever the attacker might decide to strike, you must learn to think like the attacker. And to think like the attacker, you must learn to spot and exploit the vulnerabilities. And therefore, you must gain some practical experience in attacking systems. This interplay between attack and defense is really at the core of security. Attack and defense are inextricable. You cannot separate them. You cannot just say, well, I'm a good guy, so I'm going to do defense. No. There are some misguided people who worry that, oh, help, this irresponsible university professor is teaching terrorists how to attack our homeland. This is really bad. Well, people who think that way fail to understand that nobody can ever become a good defender without being skilled at attack. The reason why serious university-level security courses are needed that teach how to attack systems is because otherwise only criminals would learn that craft, and they would learn it from their underground forums as opposed to from a university course. And they already do anyway. What we are doing here with a course like this one is putting the good guys on the same footing as the bad guys who are already getting that expertise. Nobody can build a lock capable of withstanding the unwelcome attentions of crooks and burglars without first being a skilled and resourceful lock picker. So you have to have experience of breaking stuff before you can make defenses that will resist being broken by other people who are good at it. In the cybersecurity world, many adversaries are not actually particularly clever. We call them the script kiddies. Okay, they are usually very much below the skill level where they could, for example, identify a new vulnerability and conceive of an attack that would exploit it, let alone the level of being able to write a sophisticated Trojan like this Pegasus we were talking about. But the script kiddies have become proficient at running these prepackaged attack tools, the scripts, that some smarter and more dangerous attackers have created. So the script kiddies may not be that smart, but they can be quite adept at using those scripts. And they can still run circles around the defenders unless these defenders get up to speed. So defenders have to be as proficient as attackers, otherwise they have no hope. So this course is not about turning you into script kiddies. It's not about teaching you to run automated attack tools. It's about making you understand the fundamentals of security. Things in security evolve in a kind of an arms race. So today's vulnerability might get patched tomorrow, but tomorrow there will be a new attack on the patch system, and then a new patch will come in due course and so on. So you need to learn the principles, not the low-level tricks that quickly become obsolete because they get patched and so on. But in abstract, just stating the principles will not make a lot of sense, and it will not be of much use. So you need a hands-on understanding of the principles, and you can only gain that by seeing what it is that the bad guys actually do, and where is it that the bad guys have difficulties in doing their devious stuff, where is it that they have to be ingenious, what challenges they have to overcome. And if you don't go through that, then you don't have any hope of developing the mindset and the skill set that will allow you to defeat them. Now, statistically, a majority of the bad guys are just script kiddies, and they are not particularly ingenious. They just, they just recycle and reuse the stuff that was invented by a small number of smarter bad guys. But I want you to ultimately become the kind of good guy who can defeat those smart bad guys that are at the top of the pyramid. So, to do that, you first need to follow in their intellectual footsteps. So, in a sense, studying the classics. Okay, the classics here would be the attacks that have broken new ground and have made history. And of course, because these attacks were so devastating and were applied to so many systems, then they had to be stopped. And once some countermeasure was developed, then they slowly, the countermeasures became the adopted default by new systems, fortunately. So, as we do study the classics in this sense, we will have to go in and disable those countermeasures that are nowadays standard if we want to be able to replicate what the original bad guys did. So if you took me up when I said stop the video and try compiling that program and see if you can change the reward. If you just compile the program with the standard default settings of a modern C compiler, then probably the compiler silently inserted protections that didn't allow you to do what you thought you could do and overspilled from one variable to the other. So when we do explore this in a future lecture about buffer overflow, we will have to first pretend that we are going backwards in time and disable the protections that are commonplace now, but were not at the time that this attack was first introduced. So we will repeat this pattern again and again in this course, and specifically as we engage with the seed labs. Okay, we wind back the clock to a simpler age when the attack was still new, and we disable all the countermeasures that have been invented later and that are now deployed by default. And then we basically recreate the thought process of that smart first pioneering attacker back then and what they did to basically implement their attack intuition. And then once we have managed to replicate this kind of historical attack, then we enable the modern countermeasure and we see how it stops the old attack. And then we see what else the attackers have done in the meantime to defeat the new countermeasure, and so on and so on. As we said, it's usually a never-ending arms race where there can be several zigzags between attack and defense. In this course, I want to expose you to common failure patterns, common repeated mistakes in security, so that you may recognize them when they occur in new situations, in new computer systems that have not been invented yet, but that you will encounter in your professional life. Okay? I do not hold in very high esteem people who talk the talk but cannot walk the walk. So I wouldn't want you to be one of them if you are my student. If you are able to see a vulnerability, you should also have the technical skills to exploit it. Otherwise, you will be pathetically ineffective at stopping those bad guys who would exploit it in anger. So you have to be at least the equal of the bad guys if you want to have any hope of defeating them. So my aim is that by the end of this course, every one of you will have acquired, alongside an understanding of the principles, also the skills to exploit a few basic vulnerabilities, these classics we're talking about. To set the right incentive for you to gain those skills, I'll do my best to set exam questions that can only be solved by people who have acquired those skills by practice. If you want to pass my exam, do the practical exercises. If you just watch the lectures and read the handout without doing the exercises and without referring to the course textbook, you will put yourself at a severe disadvantage. Now, of course, with only a 12-hour lecture course, it's unrealistic to expect that you would become an expert, the kind of person who can invent new security primitives, invent new defenses, invent new attacks, and so on. So if you want to become proficient at that, as with any other topic, you will need to put in your proverbial 10,000 hours of practice. This course, only 12 hours, is meant to offer you, how to say, a whistle-stop tour, a mental roadmap of security. Give you a taste for the field. It will not show you everything. It will show you, give you a glimpse of the breadth of themes and topics that you need to consider. At Cambridge, we have a pretty strong research group in security with a tradition that goes pretty far back in time, further back than most other security groups at competing institutions. And if you find security attractive, then we hope that you will join us as a graduate student. But for now, you're basically just going to study these classic, the literature as it were, and learn the most basic things that crackers and criminals have been doing for decades now. And still keep doing it because not every system gets patched, unfortunately. Now, not everything that you will encounter in your professional life will be as basic as the stuff I will be showing you in this course. And indeed, many modern systems will have been patched against the well-known attacks. But nonetheless, the same patterns of failure at some higher level tend to reoccur in new flavors. And besides, you will be surprised at how many deployed systems are still unpatched against decades-old vulnerabilities. So even if studying those classics is only a first baby step, it is still a highly educational first step, and it will take you maybe quite a bit further than you might think. Now, since I'm teaching you attack stuff, when I'm speaking to intelligent and responsible adults, then I should not have to say the following, but I'll say it anyway, and in the handout I'll even put a big box around it. Stay legal, okay? I'll be teaching you potentially dangerous stuff, and it's your responsibility to use it for good and to make sure that you don't accidentally hurt anyone, including yourself. So, stay legal. Don't break anything, okay? In this course, I'm going to teach you some attacks, and I will encourage you to become proficient at deploying those attacks. These attacks can cause serious damage. The cyber weapons that are aimed at critical infrastructure use many of the same techniques. Do not launch these attacks on any system other than your own experimental setup. Understand how to confine your experiments and do confine them. Ensure that no other system is damaged or affected by your experiments. Stay legal at all times. You will be liable to be sued or prosecuted otherwise, and claiming that you did it because of the coursework will never be accepted as a mitigating excuse. Okay, be responsible, be wise, be legal. With that warning out of the way, the core of security is adversarial thinking. It is a mindset. It's difficult, perhaps impossible, to teach this mindset. So all I can do is inspire you to want to pick up this mindset. And to develop it and refine it, you will need experience. How can you get any experience in security? Well, there are many avenues. The main one, and the one that I recommend all of you on this course follow, is these famous seed labs. The seed labs do require a lot of work, but they are an integral part of this course. Do not skip them merely because they do not attract marks. Okay, you can consider them optional because they are not rewarded with grades, but you will never own this material intellectually without actually doing the exercise. Please practice as much as you can, especially if they are difficult for you. Another avenue is engaging in capture the flag competition, CTFs. That's always good, and I continue to help in the organization of these events. I've been doing that for many years now because I consider them highly beneficial. If you have the chance to take part in a CTF, then please do so and learn from your peers if you're placed in a team. From time to time, I invite the most talented among you, including medalists from past CTFs that I organized, to do small, self-contained and actually well-paid jobs for my boutique security company called Cambridge Cyber. A typical task that one of these student contractors might do for me could be to perform penetration testing on a device or some system belonging to my client. So to succeed at that, you will need a good mix of creativity, lateral thinking, and experience and deviousness to some extent, and of course intelligence, which I'm sure you do have. And I've been very pleased at the results that previous collaborators have produced. Now the answer you seek will not be in any textbook, but it will typically be accessible to you if you know the textbook inside and out. So please make the most of all these opportunities to get as much hands-on experience in security as you can. And the few who choose not to engage in practical work and who refuse to do the work of the seed labs are really cheating themselves out of a valuable education, and they will have a hard time passing the exam that I'm going to set for this course at the end of the year. You must learn adversarial thinking in order to anticipate what the bad guys might do. You have to look at everything with suspicion. You must question all assumption. And that is in part why security is interesting and appealing and fun to those of us who are at heart contrarians and reluctant to accept any dogma. But as I told you, you have to be prepared to learn a lot more than in a regular course, because all the assumptions that you might end up questioning are there for a reason, because the world is too complex without making some simplifying assumptions. And so the simplification most of the time is correct, but some of the time it is slightly wrong. And the clever attacker exploits that subtle discrepancy between the assumption, when the assumption is slightly wrong, and the reality. Okay, so when there is this slight divergence, they stick their prying tool in and separate them. And so in order to follow the attacker, or even better, in order to anticipate what the attacker might do, you must be well versed not just in the easy world of the simplifying assumption, but also in the rather more complicated underlying reality, so that you can spot the subtle places where they diverge. As we said, abstraction is one of the most powerful tools in the computer scientist's arsenal to dominate the inherent complexity of our field. But in the security game, you must be prepared to abandon the convenience of abstraction and instead go back to first principles. Going down that route can be difficult, can be time-consuming, especially when you are the first one to look for some new discrepancy, new vulnerability, and nobody has yet pointed out to you which abstraction needs to be questioned and unraveled and compared against reality. But that's why good security people are so rare and valuable and in great demand. It's useful as a starting point to be able to recognize a pattern that you spot in your client's security problem that is similar to something that I've shown you in this course, or something that you've seen elsewhere in your various extracurricular security experiences. It will rarely be exactly the same, but on the other hand, many core ideas resurface in different guises. You'd be surprised how many times the same thing, for example, not being able to quote user-supplied data properly. How many times does this core abstract idea resurface in many guises and translates into various families of vulnerabilities? So when you do find a match between this common failure pattern that you studied with me, and this match then inspires you to develop and apply a relevant solution or countermeasure, then that's really satisfying. And it's also really valuable because security problems cost real money to your client, and you will be saving them this money. And a secure and satisfied client will be very happy to pay you a nice fraction of that money that you saved them. In the next lecture, we'll start digging into more technical material. In the meantime, please get yourself an x86 box if you don't already have one, a real one or an in-cloud one, whatever you prefer, and install VirtualBox and get the seed virtual machine going. You really need to be doing the seed labs in pace with the lectures if you want to get the most out of this course. So thank you very much for staying until the end, and to let me know that you are part of this elite, leave a comment mentioning sunflower seeds. And I'll see you in the next lecture.